Hi, I'm Kelly Watson, and I'm with Orange Grove Consulting. And I'm here today to talk to you about women in COVID and some of the challenges with work life balance and these competing roles that women have during the pandemic. So, just a little bit about Orange Grove Consulting. What we do is help train women and leaders of organizations in inclusive leadership, and we help companies remove barriers to women's advancement through their organizations. So let's talk about this growing dilemma that we have where we're seeing headlines like this, how the coronavirus threatens to set back women's careers. And this is because of, some of the competing roles we're playing right now. If we have small children at home, having to act as a teacher and homeschool them, because it's more than just sort of setting them in front of a computer, isn't it? There's having to make sure that they're engaged, that they're not leaving the computer, and making sure that they get the homework done and that they're getting the right supervision for, during this time. And so we recognize that there's a lot of people who may not be comfortable with having help in the home at this time because of the pandemic. Maybe they can't afford it or think they can't afford it. And so what's happening is women are spending a lot more time with these tasks at the detriment of their careers and being able to attend fully to their careers. We know we're hearing it's causing a lot of stress, it's causing anxiety, and for many women, they may just feel like it's not worth it to try to juggle both anymore. So we wanted to change or shift this mindset a little with a model that we like to train called the Reframe Model. Where it's based in is our first book, where we discovered that women tend to have these unconscious biases about themselves. And certainly the outside world has plenty of unconscious biases about women in the workplace. But women themselves also have unconscious biases about themselves. And we discovered this. And we came up with this model, and it's based in cognitive behavioral therapy, for how to address these unconscious biases and how to remove them so that we can get better solutions. And I'm going to walk you through this model to show you kind of how it works. And then I'm going to encourage you to maybe think about some of these and apply it to the current situation for yourself. So, the first step is to listen for and recognize that there is an assumption at play with many of our either or choices or these seemingly difficult choices. There's an assumption at play, there's an underlying hidden assumption to why we're responding a certain way. So, to get this example for yourself, take a piece of paper and fold it into four. Okay, fold it in half and then fold it in half again. What I want you to do is I want you to, in the first quadrant, because you have now created four quadrants for yourself with this piece of paper, I want you to write down what are all of the difficulties that you're having right now or that you can imagine a woman is having right now because of the pandemic. So just write down, what are all the things that are happening? And I gave you some examples to begin with, so I'll just give you a minute. Go ahead and write down your examples. All right, and once you've done that, now I want you to think about why these things are a challenge for you or for a woman that you know right now. Why is this a challenge? Go ahead and write that down in the second quadrant. So maybe you came up with some things like, well, because I have to, um, do extra homework, or I'm trying to balance all these household duties on top of my work career, and I can't be on a conference call for work when I've got kids running wild, okay? So now I want you to look at the third quadrant, and I want you to write down in there why. Why are these things challenges for you? Why are they coming up? What is, not because the pandemic, but why at its core are you having to manage these challenges? So take a moment in the third quadrant and write that down. Why? Okay, so you might have written down some things like, well, because I have to supervise, they need supervision to learn and they can't be left alone. Or there's nobody else available to do it. I have to be the one. Or maybe there is somebody else available, but they have their work to do. Um, so those could be some examples. So now in the fourth corner, I want you to write down one more time why. Answer the question why. Why is this something that you're having to deal with? Okay, so when you've got that fourth quadrant of whys, this is where we should be able to get to that hidden assumption. And one of the things that we have uncovered when women really dig down into the whys is that we get to this place where we discover that women feel that taking care of the children is their primary job. They get to have the work and the career, but only after job number one is done first. And they wouldn't have just come up with this why on their own. This is something that's been ingrained in us since we're very, very young. It's reinforced by the media all around us. It's why when women want to get ahead in business, we say things like, well, we need to have daycare. Why do we need to have daycare for women? Well, because women are this primary parent role and they have to take care of the children. And so it really is a fundamental ingrained bias that we have about womanhood. And we've bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and we, in many ways, agree with it without even questioning it. And how do we know this is something that is an assumption that is underneath all this stuff? Well, we notice that guilt is playing a role as a trigger. So when we think about, why can't I focus on my career right now? Well, because the children need my attention, or because the household needs my attention. When guilt shows up, when we say, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to attend this meeting anyway, now I feel guilty because the kids are in the background tugging at my shirt, or because they've painted the wall in crayon, while I wasn't paying attention. And we notice the guilt shows up in that case. The guilt is there because it's a trigger that shows us that this is an underlying bias, an underlying assumption that we have bought into, that is probably bugging us a little bit because we haven't really put our finger on it. But by doing this why exercise, we were able to dig down to it and realize that's what we believe fundamentally at its core. So the third step in this process is to just notice this, to just notice when these types of things show up. Notice that I'm responding when the pandemic happened and the kids were suddenly at home. How did we all respond? Did I automatically slip into the role of primary parent and making sure that the kids were doing their homework and taking on that? Did I slip into it without even questioning it? Or did I stop and say, hey, maybe we can both work together on this? What did I do? What was my behavior? And that is a really important piece of this, because oftentimes our behaviors are really indicative of what this underlying bias is, what this underlying assumption is. And so if you look at the behavior, you can backtrack it to the assumption that it's based upon. So the really cool thing you get to do once you get to an assumption is now you get to examine it and say, is it true? Is it true for me? And maybe you'll find that you don't actually agree with it. But you can't identify it if you haven't gone out and identified it as core. You don't get the same luxury to be able to examine it. So let's think about it. So I have this pen, and I'm observing it, and I can pick it up and I can look at it from all these different angles. Think about this as this assumption. The woman in the household, is primarily responsible for the children. It's her job. Her career gets to come second, but only after this job happens first. Do we agree with that? Do we buy into that? We get to look at it from all angles and say, you know what? I don't agree with that. We might also look at it and say, I have two partners in my household, two parents, and both of us had children, right? And both of us are responsible for those children. And fundamentally, on its own level, we're both actually responsible for earning a living and making sure that our career is moving forward. So if I reframe, if I rewrite the rule, mom's responsible for the kids primarily and gets to have the career second. And now the rule is no, 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 no. We're both responsible for the kids, and we both are responsible for career. Now what we get is to choose much more consciously what our behavior is going to be. right? We've identified this assumption. We've reframed it. We've said, I don't agree. We've turned it on its head, and now the options open up. Now we get a lot more different opportunities to choose differently. Okay, so here's some examples. If we're both responsible and we work together as a team, we could come up with maybe a situation, and I've heard some clients say that this is what they've done, is where we split the workday into two equal halves of 6 hours each, right? So one of us works uninterrupted for 6 hours and can schedule meetings and can schedule face-to-face interaction with teams, whatever we need to do, while the other person is looking after the household and the children and monitoring and managing whatever's coming up there, making sure that they're held to their screens and focused on their learning, right? And then we switch. We have a handoff point where we switch roles. Each of us then still gets 6 hours of uninterrupted work time. And that's not to say we can't come back at it and work at a different time when the school day's over. But that's 6 hours of meetings or time that you really do need to be face to face with somebody else in your organization and have that uninterrupted. So now we've each got 6 hour work days. Now, of course, that's not a realistic full work day, but we still have time left in the day to do other things. But 6 uninterrupted hours is a lot better than one of us getting 8 hours and one of us getting nothing, right? So we still are both able to be productive, and the children are getting 100% of one parent's attention for that time. Another opportunity could come up where we potentially merge with other people in our workplace and create these learning pods where we have now extended the household, the pandemic household, and our families have become a mixed unit, both at the workplace and in the home for schooling. And so that could make a lot of sense, because then we have people, we could either have mixed age groups where some of the older children are helping to supervise some of the younger children, or we could have them all the same age group if the organization's big enough, where they're all in the same boat. And so then it might make sense to bring in a tutor or some kind of provider that could also be part of that extended household. So now you can see we're getting some much more creative solutions. The other thing is we might decide that this pandemic period, how long is it going to last? A year, 2 years? That for those 2 years, our child is going to learn differently, that they're not going to go to the traditional, path that they were on, but rather we're going to have a different sort of a learning environment, kind of a hybrid homeschool or whatever, with different resources brought in so that they don't have to sit at a computer and stare at it for how many ever hours. The point is that when we work together and we bring both of our careers as equal, we bring both of the parenting roles as equal, now we have a whole bunch more solutions. Now, the thing we often hear in the pushback or the resistance we get, because these entrenched assumptions and biases are pretty long held, right? The pushback we often get is, well, but he makes more money, so that's why his career is more important. Or if I, agree to get care to pay for childcare, then it's going to be more than what I make. And I'll say a couple things about that. First of all, you both need childcare. So comparing your salary or his salary or whatever is really not relevant to the childcare conversation, because if you were divorced, for example, you would both have to pay for childcare for half of the time. So you're really both responsible for childcare. The second thing I would say, as a just to give you some language as a pushback, is that when you're working, you pay what you make to somebody else. It prevents you from taking a career break that could end your career earnings or significantly put them on a lower path. So we're not just comparing your salary today, but you're comparing your lifetime salary to what you're going to have to pay today for that childcare. And that childcare is a temporary situation. Your lifetime salary is hopefully not. But if you interrupt it, thinking that it's some kind of an equal exchange, what I will tell you is that's not been the case, is how it's borne out for women. So hopefully you can overcome some of your hidden assumptions by identifying them, examining them really, really closely, and then deciding for yourself what is the reframe. And that can put you on a path to a much better COVID experience. I'm Kelly Watson. Give us a call and let us know how you're doing.